If you want to learn to draw anything, don't draw the object that you see. Instead, draw the shapes that you see within the object and let the object emerge. Let me explain. But before I do that, if you're interested in learning how to draw anything in 6 months without any prior skill set, comment happy below and I'll send you my course information. When I teach my students how to draw, we talk about shapes and how important shapes are. If you learn to look at things in a combination of shapes, you're learning how to see like an artist does. Let me explain as we look at this picture. So if we want to draw this dog, instead of looking at him and saying, okay, I'm going to draw a dog, if we can break it down and say, I'm going to draw the shapes within this dog, and that's how I'm going to start. That is the foundation. When we teach our students how to draw, we actually teach them what we call sketch 1, 2, 3. And the first step is always to draw the shapes that you see. The shapes are the foundation that sets the whole picture. So let me show you what I mean. I'm just going to put a piece of plastic over the top of this picture. And if we're talking about drawing the shapes that we see, we're going to draw shapes. We might draw ovals, we may draw squares, triangles, we may draw organic shapes that have no name. We're just going to draw shapes that are overlapping and creating the form that we want. So we're going to start with the very biggest shapes. So to start with, if I looked here, I'm going to just draw the shape of a big oval here. So that would be the biggest shape. I've got another oval here, and then I've got a little one here. I've got a circle here, and then I've got another organic shape there. We've got an oval here, and more of a rounded, wider oval here. So these are the very basic shapes of this dog. You can see that we started with the very biggest shapes. When we draw, we want to make sure we start with the big. We want to work light and loose and kind of messy and not worry about being defined. We don't want to commit to our lines too soon. We're going to start with the very biggest shapes, and then we're going to work to the smaller shapes. So before we go on, let me just explain to you on this piece of paper, when I say don't commit too soon, I'm saying if I'm going to draw an oval, I don't want you to draw an oval like this. See how dark the lines are? See how committed they are? There's one line and it's there, and it's you have to work around it. You have to erase it, try to make it work, try to make it fit where you want it to fit. But if you keep it light and loose, and I've got many lines, can you see? You can see these lines. I'm drawing a little darker so you can see them in the camera, but there's a lot of lines to choose from. So many lines give you many options. As we refine it, we can choose and we can start committing to where we want it to be. But we don't want to start with a solid defined line, because then we're kind of limiting ourselves. We want to make sure that we start light and loose and build upon it. Let's get back to our shapes here. If you look at the shapes here, we started with the very biggest shapes that we see. And when I teach my students in Happy Artist, we talk about shapes a lot. Not only the big shapes and where they fall and where they overlap, but also the proportions of the shapes, the angles, looking at negative space and all sorts of things that can help you make sure that you get your shapes in the right place. So if you're interested in learning how to draw, comment happy below and we'll send you the information for our online course, Happy Artist. So here we have the very biggest shapes. Let's go ahead and break that down even further. I'm going to put another plastic sleeve right over the top of this one. We started with the biggest shapes, and you can see that we've got the basic foundation of the drawing, but we still have a lot of detail that we need to get in. One of the biggest problems that I've seen my students that I've taught over the years, that they struggle with when they first start drawing, is that they want to get into detail. They want to put all these little finite details in before they get their foundation in. So to make sure that you don't get that detail and get caught up in the detail, we want to make sure that you are working big to little. So we've got the biggest shapes. Now let's go to the next shape here. So can you see that this line goes outside, and that's okay. But what we want to do is we just wanted to get that foundation. Now we're going to break it down into smaller shapes. Let's put the hood, make the hood another shape. We can make the jacket another shape. We're not adding the detail. We're not putting a line where everything is. We're just making a basic shape. We're breaking it down. We can put the eye in, the placement of the eye. We could put the placement of the nose. Got another eye here. Now, when you say eye, you tend to want to draw an oval or a circle or a football shape, but draw the shape that you actually see. On this one, you don't see that full circle, so you want to draw the shape that you see. You can see that there's a shape here. If you want to get the inside of the ear, you could even draw an organic shape like this. So if I took the bottom shape out, you can see now we started breaking it down into smaller shapes. All right, so let's put them both back together, and we're going to go a little bit further. We have them overlapping each other here. You can see that we have all of these shapes figured out. Now what we're going to do is we're going to break it even further. We're going to look at shapes within the object, such as the stripe that you see on the front of his little face here. We're going to look at shadow shapes. Can you see that there is a shadow shape right here? So we can break it down even further. What we want to do is we want to start drawing. We want to start with the very basic shapes that we see. Then we want to change those shapes into an object. So at this point, this is where I would start combining those shapes together to create the object. And then I would start drawing in shadow shapes, such as the shape at the bottom here, the shadow shape that you have along here, the shadow shape over here. So creating shadow shapes will also help you be able to turn the form and make it look three-dimensional. And we've got more shapes in here. We've got another shape. We've got another oval. We've got sometimes we feel like it needs to be an object, but it can actually just be a shape within that object. We can see there's kind of a darker shape right here. So we could break it down here. We can see that this is another shape right here. And so we can start breaking it down. And remember, we're not doing any detail yet. We're just trying to see the shapes that we see. One of the best things that you can do, I call it mapping. And that is to try to, as you start defining and try to get everything in its place, don't jump to from one spot to another too big. Let me use my pencil here and I will show you here. So if I'm drawing this guy here, if I want to draw his face, I am going, let's see, we'll look at the stripe here. If I got the stripe here like this, and I'm sketching his face, getting his nose in like this, I don't want to jump clear over to this side. I want to jump to whatever's closest to me. So I could look at that little line here where that wrinkle is, and I can say, okay, I'm jumping to that next space, and then I'm jumping to the next space up. And then I'm jumping over to his eye, and that's where I'm getting the edge of his eye in. So you can see I am just doing one shape at a time. And I am just doing the smallest space as I possibly can instead of trying to jump over here. If I looked here and I was trying to get to the edge of his head, I'm just making a guesstimate. I have no idea if that's right or not, but by doing the smaller sections, I'm able to determine what's better or what's closer as I work along my way. And I had that too far out. So when you're drawing, make sure that you are jumping from one shape to another that's the closest to you. Another thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you draw what you see, not what you think you see. And I'm going to explain that with this other picture here. Looking at this picture, we are looking at a sandwich here, and it has a piece of bread. Now, we all know that a slice of bread looks like this. A symbol of a bread looks like this, something like that. We might want to draw what a bread looks like because that's what we're familiar with, and we want to draw what's in our head, what we know as bread. But when we're looking at this bread, if we don't think of it as a slice of bread and we think of it as a shape, then we'll be able to draw that shape and not get caught up in the symbolism of it all. So we're going to go ahead and put a plastic sleeve over this sandwich, and let's show you the shapes that we see. If we're drawing this, I can break down even the crust, but I'm looking at it as a shape. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to say, okay, this is a shape. Now, if I took that shape and put it here so you can see it, that does not look like a piece of bread at all, but it will emerge because I'm focusing on the shapes and not the object. It will emerge as I build upon it. So let's go ahead and add some more to it. So we're going to start with one shape, then we're going to move on to another shape, and we're going to let it build upon it. Now we know that because of the perspective, the shape is going to be different than what we might think a slice of bread looks like. And we've got something on top of it. So we are going to do an organic shape here. We're going to do a long, skinny oval here. And we might even just do a circle just to get the idea of what's going on there. If we put those over here, can you see that we've broken it down into the shapes? Instead of looking at it like this, we're looking at it from the right perspective. We're seeing the shapes that we see, and we are creating that object. That object is emerging. So when I start drawing, if I get caught up and I'm looking at the object and I want to draw that object so much without even realizing it, I get hung up and I feel like I can't do it or I feel overwhelmed. But when I stop and I slow down, I look at it again and I look at it as a combination of shapes, I start seeing the shapes. I see the big shapes, then I see the smaller shapes, then I see the even smaller shapes, and then I go into detail. So in Happy Artist, I teach the students how to focus on the shapes, but we teach them how to also make sure they're using all the different tools that they have to make sure that the shape's correct, the proportions are right, the placement is right, the angle is right, and everything falls into place. And when you have it all fall into place, then that object emerges and your accuracy improves, goes way up because you've started with the very basic shapes instead of the object. So when you are wanting to draw something, instead of looking at something as an object, look at it as a combination of shapes and build upon it, add the shapes, change the shape into an object, and then you can start picking out little tiny pieces, adding detail, adding smaller shapes, and creating that object. And you'll be so amazed at how much easier it is to draw because you have not got caught up in the detail and the tiny things in the picture before you've got the basic foundation of the drawing in. If you want to create artwork that you're proud of in 6 months, comment happy below and I'll send you my course information, Happy Artist. So to review things, the first thing we want to do is we want to break our object down into shapes. As you can see here, we broke this down into big shapes and we broke this down into shapes so that we can actually see our proportions, our angles, and we're focused on a shape within the shape. You want to make sure that you're looking at the biggest shapes first and you're working down to a smaller shape and then smaller shape until you get to the tiny shapes. And you want to make sure that you are focused on only the shapes and not the object to begin with. So make sure that you're looking at the negative space shapes. You can look at shadow shapes. You can look at the big foundational shapes. All these different shapes combined will create the object that you're trying to do. And don't get caught into detail until you've got all of the shapes in and everything is in its place. In Happy Artist, I teach the students how to make sure that they've got their proportions right, their angles right, the placement right, and we teach different tools that will help with that. Negative space, plumb lines, and all sorts of things that will help with that accuracy. So if you're interested in creating art and feeling confident about your artwork, learning the foundation and just getting that confidence so that you can look at something and say, I know I can draw that, comment happy below and we'll send you the information for my course, Happy Artist. I hope that helps.